And I just want to make sure when you say you mean the Federal Metal Company. You don't mean Chris Greenfield specifically,
No,
because
no, not Chris. Yeah, I'm not getting metallurgical information and knowledge from Chris.
if I ever try to offer it to you, Nate, I need you to do me a favor and put a bag over my head and shut me up.
You're listening to the Foundry Talk podcast with your hosts, Nate McLean and Perry Merritt. Take it away, boys.
Well, welcome back. My name is Perry. With me, as always, is my partner, Nate McLean. And we are privileged today to have Chris Greenfield from the Federal Metal Company out of Cleveland, right, Chris? Cleveland?
That's correct, yeah.
And Chris is a VP at the Federal Metal Company. And we're going to talk today about a lot of different things. We've been already talking about politics and dinner parties and all sorts of stuff. But Chris, I wanted to ask you right off the bat, I was on your website the other day and I noticed a picture of a guy sorting. It looked like he was sorting plumbing parts. It looked like probably brass. And I'm curious, you guys deal with a lot of scrap metal, right? Is that correct? And how do you guys deal with bringing that in?
So for your listeners that are, obviously you're speaking to a Foundry audience. So to the extent that your listeners are Foundrymen, they're buying feedstock oftentimes, from an ingot maker, and Federal Metal is one of just a few people left in that space. And in the copper and brass world, we're buying literally dozens of grades of copper-bearing scrap metal from processors and recyclers all over North America, bringing it to our facility here in Cleveland, or just outside of Cleveland. We're actually in Bedford, and yeah, we do sort that stuff, Perry. The way we look at everything that we buy, okay, in the value add, or one of the value adds that we try to provide to our Foundry customers, and delivering them competitive pricing so that they too can be competitive in the world, is we look at everything that we're buying as a combination of chemistry, recovery, and price. Right? It'd be very easy to just say, well, every single week we need X pounds of this and Y pounds of that and Z pounds of something else, and those ratios are largely in place and largely true. But really what we're looking for in the marketplace as scrap buyers is we're looking for opportunities to buy combinations, depending on what we're making, combinations of copper, tin, lead, zinc, aluminum, nickel. Again, depending on the alloy that we're going to be manufacturing. We're looking to buy those combination of elements in the highest recovery, lowest cost form. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And so, all right. So when metal comes through the door, our supply chain, and we're very proud of the relationships that we have on that side of our business, and many of these relationships go back decades. They're not transactional in the sense that you do business with somebody today and never talk to them again. We're buying, we have suppliers that we've bought, over 1,000 loads from since I arrived 17 years ago. But we're going to touch that metal and we're going to make sure that it's properly classified, so that when it goes into our furnaces, we know exactly what it is. And we obviously would know the price, and we're going to have a sense of its recovery. Especially if it's a plumbing fitting like you're referencing, that's, a very, very high recovery item. But we need to know the chemistry. And sometimes, our guys taking a look at that stuff is that extra layer of protection to make sure that we're not putting something in our furnace that we don't know what it is. If you've got too much yellow mixed with too much red, that's going to change the base chemistry of what you're melting and change your recipe. And we're real specific about what we're doing there.
You said Foundryman. My background is being just a guy in his garage melting some metal, but I have a lot of friends that are in the same boat as me. They're hobbyists essentially, And they're under the illusion that, or delusion maybe, that they can melt scrap down, make their own ingots, and they think they're gonna be able to sell them for something, right, at a scrapyard. And I'm curious, when you guys start getting things that will even take anything like that, where some guy, it looks like somebody has made an ingot out of something, would that be something that you would even take, or is that something that you would pass on because you don't know what's in it?
Well, yeah, first of all, let's talk a little bit about the DNA of the Federal Metal Company, okay? Federal Metal Company started in 1913. Joseph Nagusky was an immigrant in the United States. He was in downtown Cleveland, Ohio. In 1913, Cleveland, Ohio was the epicenter, or one of several epicenters of manufacturing excellence in the world, let alone North America. But here he is. He's an immigrant from Eastern Europe. He comes here. He has some resources, and he starts making scrap. And he recognizes very quick scrap packages. I'm sorry, because he has a scrap facility, and he recognizes pretty quickly that there's an opportunity because of all the foundries that were in Cleveland back in the day, that if he started making certified ingot in known chemistry form, that he could sell it onto those foundries and that they could make castings. And at the time, it would have been bushings and, probably bridle pieces for horses and so forth. But, all those sorts of traditional things. That's where we started, Perry. So to hear you or your friends say, yeah, I can do this and create value. Yeah, they may very well be able to create value. Now, there's a heck of a lot of metallurgical science that goes into the process of alloying disparate elements together. And it isn't just quite as easy as taking a pinch of salt and a shake of pepper, some flour, and mixing it with water and running with it. It really is a pretty. But with the right amount of metallurgical understanding, you can actually make that work. Getting to your specific question, would Federal ever buy something like that? I mean, the first thing that we're going to ask, and this has happened before, sadly, is, what is the genesis of that material? If we see a semi-finished product like an ingot come through the door as scrap metal at Federal Metal, we want to know where it came from. If it came from one of our, competitors as ingot and was, taken from a foundry like, Nate's Foundry, for example, we're not going to just buy it and accept it. We're going to make sure it gets back to its rightful home. Metal theft is a real issue, and has been, ever since the early 2000s, when copper went from $1.25 a pound to $4 a pound, or, it didn't go there overnight, but it's, trading today at, $4.60 a pound. There's incentive out there for people that have ill intent to take it. And, so first of all, we're going to do is make sure that it was actually produced in this exact format that you just described. And yeah, of course we would buy it if it was, if we could identify exactly what it was. In fact, we just had a situation here where a friend of ours who is way bigger than a hobbyist, but way smaller than a foundryman of Nate's scale. He specializes in making cannons for Civil War reenactments. All right. And that's his business. And as you inevitably, you probably know, there's a real market there, both for statue work, but also for people like my recently deceased uncle, who was very active as a reenactor. He owns 2 cannons that he bought that are all part of his reenactment ceremonies that he used to do. At any rate, our friend here locally did exactly what you described. He tried to make his own ingot so that he could cast it, basically take us out of the middle of having to make him ingot. He worked on that for about 4 months, and he called me. He's like, yeah, this just isn't going well. This is no fun at all. My castings look terrible. I'm like, yeah, I know. I said, look, bring all the stuff that you've got in here. We'll take it off your hands and remelt it, recycle it, and then we'll give you credit for it so you can take some actual ingot out of here and go make a good, and stay focused on making
absolutely
your cannons.
Yeah, well, I mean, the thing that I've always wondered about is these guys are taking things like, just copper, right? Copper, there's multiple grades of copper. They're taking stuff that they're getting from scrap yards or their who knows? These guys might be going out to new housing things and ripping wire out of the wall for all I know, but they're melting wire, they're melting different kinds of copper pipe, they're melting all this stuff together that are, I assume, different alloys. I mean, I know with copper pipe, there's a couple of different grades. Some is softer than the other, and so you get these things in, and you need to create a certified ingot with a certain composition. How do you deal with this other stuff that's inside that metal that you bring in?
Well, yeah, again, the first thing you have to understand is what actually are you getting in, right? So copper wire is easy because, if it's wire, by definition, wire is built to conduct electricity, right? And anything that inhibits the conduction of electricity is a problem in wire. So wire is effectively, 99.99+% copper. The only reason it wouldn't run that high is because it has a connection on it or something, a brass connector that exists or something like that, or sometimes it's tin or lead coated, which
Right.
can be a problem. And nowadays, actually, Southwire, which is I believe, the largest manufacturer of new wire in North America, they have patented a product in order to deal with metal theft. Is they run a tin-plated wire through a strand of call it 3/4 inch cable. They'll and then they'll mark that tin, because the tin is obviously soft enough where it can take a label. So now you've got a modicum of tin that runs through that you've got to account for. So the question on how you do your blending then is, first of all, you have to know exactly what you have. Copper tubing, if it's not soldered or connected to any fittings, copper tube it's all copper, but it has a trace of phosphorus in it, and that phosphorus is necessary in order to make the tube malleable, so it can be a tube in the first place.
Yep.
Again, if you're making an alloy, like a nickel, aluminum, bronze that has an incredibly low phosphorus tolerance, you're not going to put any number one copper tubing in the furnace. If you do, you won't hit the phos spec. You're going to have to use wire. And there are all kinds of other, alloying limits. For many of the alloys we're making, the most common application or the use of ingot in North America is to distribute potable water. Okay, that's the backbone. Lead-free brass or bronze alloys are they're the backbone of any waterworks system that takes, not really within the house. The higher end brass products that we're making end at the water meter, but from the water meter all the way back to the water treatment center, that whole system is filled with fittings and harnesses and larger meters and valves that are made out of a lead-free plumbing brass. Well, that lead-free plumbing brass is a combination of copper, tin, zinc, and bismuth. There's no lead in it because there's been a push, as you probably are both aware, to remove lead from contact with any potable drinking water. Okay, but when you have that, you've got four elements there I just named, plus tolerances for trace amounts of other things like nickel or what have you. The only thing that you're definitely not going to have in it is lead, but you just have to get it, within the ranges. I mean, these are very specific alloys, Perry, but they're not. If all we did is take pure copper, pure tin, pure zinc, and pure bismuth and alloy them together, there'd be no real reason to making it, and B, the cost of that would be prohibitive to everybody along the consumer chain after us. So we have to find those elements and where copper, tin, zinc, and bismuth can be bought at discounts to their elemental values.
Okay, so I'm going to get off this topic, but after I ask one more question. So then go back to the idea of some guy in his garage making ingots, and he doesn't have he doesn't have an accurate inventory of what went into that ingot, right? He just had a bunch of scrap that he threw in the crucible and melted it. I assume that he's going to get, if he gets a price at all, he's going to get a lower price because you have to do work on it to identify what's in that thing. Is that kind of how it would work? If he could sell it at all, you're going to have to do some kind of metallurgy on it to figure out what it is.
Yeah, but that's not going to be difficult. But the answer is he'll. But the one thing to understand about the scrap markets in general, and I can't say this enough, is that they're very liquid. He will be able to sell it. Like
Okay.
there is a buyer out there for it. It's not the end user. It's not it's not the highest and best possible buyer, but for sure, if he has some sense for what it runs chemically, or if his buyer can tell, and there are all kinds of methods for doing that quickly. We, for example, use handheld spectrometers here at Federal, and in pretty much every uh, metal recycling center in North America is armed with these same portable spectrometers. They can read the chemistry of a solid piece and tell, and get close enough to the elemental value of what that thing is going to run if they have any experience using their spectrometer very quickly, and that will allow it to have a value. Yeah, you're not going to walk into the biggest and best, most technically high-end foundry in North America and try to sell it. You're going to have to certify it to do that, and even then, it's going to be very, very difficult. But for somebody like us, we'll take that. It'll end up right in the furnace, turning it into whatever the best use of it is.
All right.
And that's right. And so, Perry, just for your own knowledge, you can look up PMI on Google. It's positive material identification, and it just looks like a gun. They put it on that material and they hit it, and it will give them a quick reading. It's not the most accurate when it comes to chemistry wise, but you would use a full blown spectrometer to do that. But they can do it really, really quickly. So it doesn't like it takes hours. They have to cut something or make drillings and do all this crazy lab work. It's really, really fast. I mean, 30 seconds and they have an idea what that material is. The question that you run into when you go to scrap yards and you deal with those guys is, what's inside of that bar? Did you throw some steel inside of there, or are you hiding something to get the weight up so that it's not actually copper? It may be a chunk of carbon steel or rebar or whatever else that they have to wonder about that they're throwing in their mystery metal. So I would think that their value streams for their scrap material would be people that they can trust, they've had relationships with long term, that they're not wanting to jeopardize it for something stupid like that.
Yeah, I would just suggest too, for those folks, they probably would have been better off if they kept the scrap metal that they had in the first place, took it to the same person, and just sold it in the form it was in before they put the time and energy into melting it. But
the propane or oil burning furnace that they're using, they're just throwing more money into it because Chris at the federal metal companies, they're gonna do that anyway. They're gonna throw it in there, and you guys have like a 40,000-pound rotary furnace or something. I mean, or whatever it is, and it's going to blend it and melt it way more efficiently than they're going to do it at home in their garage.
Yeah. In terms of the scale, we're going to recycle roughly, in just our ingot making operation, we're going to recycle roughly 1.4 to 1.5 million pounds of post-consumer scrap a week here at our facility. So we're doing this at scale. It's not which is sort of necessary in order to participate and to support the industry the way it needs to be supported. So typically, Perry, we're not dealing with that person usually doesn't come to us with no prior relationship and try to sell us 1,000 pounds of anything, because that's really not what we do. We're buying from, for the most part, large in pretty sophisticated metal recyclers all across the country. We have suppliers from Denver. We buy a lot of metal in Texas. We were talking before we went online about the scope and the size of the Texas economy, and it just blows my mind how big that is. Just as a thing, we have a facility in Little Rock, Arkansas that we put their literally or at least significantly because of its proximity to the Texas scrap markets.
Yeah.
But
I just
we're
drove through there
buying metal
last.
from all over Canada and up and down the East Coast to bring into our facility, and usually in 40,000 pound increments.
Full
So,
truckloads.
I
Okay.
mean, train cars, is that kind of what's coming into you guys, or?
No, we're bringing it on, just semi trailers, trucks over
Okay.
the road. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. So, um, and we don't take we do take a lot of straight loads of material, but a lot of the material that we're buying, there might be 7 or 8 items in the truck coming from a scrapyard in New Orleans or Chicago. And it comes here and it's been prearranged on what the items are, what the general weight is going to be, and what the prices are. And then, as I mentioned earlier, we're going to take a look at that material. We're going to dump it on the ground. We're going to run it across the table if it needs to be sorted. We're going to sample it if it's a chip or a turning, and understand what the cutting fluid losses might be, and also what that chemistry is on the chip, just to make sure it's uniform. There's a general tendency to believe in our, not necessarily here at Federal, but just in the world, that scrap dealers are trying to, they'll do anything to kind of get an edge in these transactions. And that was certainly would have been more accurate, 25 years ago, but
Mm.
it really is not the case anymore. These are incredibly sophisticated companies with a lot of skill, and they're really, having a good relationship with a good supply chain is really important to our success here. But we still want to check everything because, again, as I said earlier, we need to know what the chemistry and the recovery is of everything that we're putting in that furnace. So we're going to verify it ourselves here, and we've got a great team of people that do that.
So let's talk a little bit about shift gears here and talk a little bit more about the business context. And, I know Nate had a couple of questions, but who are your customers? I mean, are they large, small, everybody in between? Who are your customers typically?
No, it's a great question, Perry. As I mentioned a minute ago, the majority of the ingot, consumed in North America in general is in the service of distributing potable water. Okay.
Right.
So the customers that exist in that space are, by and large, the OEMs anyway, very, very large foundries, the biggest brass and bronze foundries in North America. And if you want to look at it if you go to your basement, if you have a basement in Colorado, I know you all don't sometimes, but there's a water meter in your house, and that
Right.
water meter is made out of bronze, and it was very
Yep.
likely made by one of our customers. That's just the easiest thing to think of. If you go to your faucet, it's very unlikely that you're going to see anything that was cast in that faucet by an American foundry. Most of that is going to be a machined part or a forging of some sort that's relatively inexpensive, often made overseas, frankly. There are very
Mhm.
few faucet manufacturers left in North America, unfortunately. You go back 75 years, we recycle old faucets all the time that are, chrome plated, and you see those big chunky faucets that used to exist on old farm sinks. We see them all the time that comes through the scrap stream, but those things are 100 years old. Um, a lot of the modern stuff is filled with all kinds of plastic and so forth. But to think about what we do at your house, that's probably the easiest way to think about it. Is think of that water meter. The other, and those companies are huge. Sometimes they're public companies, but often they're just very large, family-owned foundry businesses with hundreds of employees and certainly a strong footprint domestically, if not internationally. Um, Other areas of business, our business um, uh, include work in machinery, making, our foundry customers are making bearings that, help either, help things that need to slide, or
Mhm.
things that need to roll. And that would include, companies that their end consumer might be Caterpillar or Komatsu, or, some sort of massive piece of equipment, or locomotion, the train uh, world. That's a big application for bronze. any sort of boating. If you, I don't know if either one of you are big boaters, go take a look at the propeller on your bass boat, or the strut that's holding the drive shaft to the bottom of the boat. Those are often made out of bronze alloys. They could be made out of stainless if they're on the lower end of the quality stream, but the higher the quality stream goes, the more likely they're going to be made out of brass or bronze alloy. Yachting has got all kinds of decorative parts that go on, high-end yachts, and those customers are often for us on the smaller side. Sculptures, Perry, are a really fun application of bronze. That pretty much every bronze statue is made out of the same alloy. And those, so if you see, we've been honored enough to have our ingot used to make a Pete Rose statue at the Great American Ballpark in Cincinnati, or Peyton Manning statue in Indianapolis. And I know a couple of guests ago, you hosted the head of art castings in Colorado, and again, he's using Everdor to make those alloys. That's frankly for me one of the funnest and most interesting applications, because it's so tangible, right? You can go look at it.
Yeah.
So we have a lot of fun with that. But it really runs. I mean, we've got artists that are one-man shops that buy ingot from us, 500 pounds or 1,000 pounds at a time. And then we have large OEMs that are buying, truckloads of, every month
Of ingots.
of the same alloy. So it just depends.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible. I was at a facility yesterday, and they run your material there in 100,000 pounds a week.
Yep.
Week in and week out religiously, and I'm like, holy moly! It's so impressive to see the operations that are out there, and to know that those type of corporations and hundreds of employees at multiple locations, and over 3,000 employees, that sort of thing. It's just incredible to know that the American manufacturing is alive and well. I get giddy every time I get to go into a big facility, a foundry like that.
Yeah, I do too. I absolutely love it. And I think you have to have an appreciation for the process. You have to have, a real understanding for what, how hard it is to actually succeed in this space, how innovative and tenacious a lot of these folks are to continue to succeed. I find, honestly, I feel like for the first time in a couple of generations that there's an inertia in the public realm toward the work that folks like the three of us do. That hasn't been the case. I mean, everyone has, it's been our industry has been, looked down upon, and there's been nothing but one regulation after another to make succeeding in our business that much more difficult, without massive improvements in terms of making it a better industry. It's just more things to worry about.
Sure.
But my gosh, am I excited about what the next decade's going to look like in our space. I think it's fantastic.
It's super exciting.
Yeah, it is, and it's necessary. We cannot continue to take out each other's laundry and expect that that's an economy that's sustainable. We have to make things, and it's really, certainly I'm just one of 180 associates here at a Federal Metal Company that are super proud to be part of making something.
Sure. Yeah, and they should be. I mean, what you guys do and the volume and the scale of the product that you guys run through there is, I mean, doing 1.4 to 1.5 million pounds per week. I mean, just to be able to wrap your head around that's almost too large to even for most people to even think about. But when you see it happening, and you're right, because in the next decade, I say the next 5 to 10 years are really critical, especially for the foundry industry, from my perspective anyway, of a foundry owner and a guy that's been doing this for 3 decades. And unfortunately, the people that have come they're behind us and they have coming up behind us. They really haven't always planned ahead, and so therefore it's creating a glut of these foundries that haven't been profitable, they haven't been maintained real well, the deferred maintenance and all these things that go along with these aging companies, because maybe they were working off of paper thin margins and things of that nature, so they didn't have the revenue to actually maintain the foundry in a safe manner, or not even the safety thing, but even the environmental thing, because we need to be good stewards of the environment. We don't want to be having plumes of smoke and odor and all those things that are the negatives that we get beat up for. That's just not the case in 2025. The products that we use to make sand molds, that we're making investment castings and permanent mold and die castings and even the art foundry guys, there's not a lot of smoke and odor. We don't have black plumes of smoke blowing out of our facilities. We are very good stewards of the environment. We're a very clean and green industry. And I think that's why it's so important. And I know that you're the chair of the NIF's Governmental Affairs Committee that I'm hopefully going to be able to participate when and hopefully be able to call on some of these people and in D.C., especially for the fly-in on June 10th and 11th. I think it's vital. I think it's very important that we go and we articulate our message as foundrymen and the industry, recyclers and all that sort of thing, because we are green. There's nobody that is greener than us. I mean, I tell people all the time, if you really want to get behind environmental impact and things like that, you know what? Start a foundry, buy a foundry, do it, because guess what? You are helping the whole world in that manner produce something, because we're actually recycling these alloys, aluminum and copper-based alloys, iron and steel, the ferrous, non-ferrous, everything about it. I kind of get a little pretty passionate about it, because I feel like we get a bad rap in the foundry industry, that we get beat up because they think about all the things way back in the past in the Industrial Revolution, when you see these pictures or drawings, a depiction of this black plumes of hanging over these towns and stuff. And that was the case then. It's not the case today at all.
No, no, I think in order to survive today, in order to be a viable and responsible supplier to anybody, you have to be investing in the things that keep the men and women in your company safe and keep your communities safe. And if you can't do those two things, then honestly, you don't deserve to continue to participate. Um, and and I say you can't. There is no can't. It's the old joke, you saying you can't or you won't. Uh, you
Right.
have to be willing to make these investments, and I'm really fortunate, as our the entire workforce here in Federal Metal. We work for a family, and an owner that is completely committed to those two things, and so we have a robust safety program, and very tight environmental controls. And Nate, you're 100% right. The scrap recycling industry used to be called ISRI, which was the Institute for the Scrap Recycling Industry. Okay. And a year ago, almost exactly a year ago, they renamed themselves REMA, for the Recycled Materials Association, because literally everything that walks in, that ends up in a recycling facility, folks think of recycling as putting, plastic in a in a garbage can
A
that gets
bit.
picked up separately by your municipality and often ends up in a landfill anyway if it's plastic. But they think of that as recycling. No, no. Recycling is what happens when your plumber comes to your house and does a bunch of work in your kitchen and takes out all the old stuff and replaces it with new, takes all of that raw material that he just pulled out of your house right to a recycling center, gets paid on the spot for the value of that copper tubing or old faucet or whatever it is that he has. Gets paid for it. That person then aggregates it, probably resells it one or two times before it ends up here at a place like Federal Metal, where we turn it into a known chemistry mechanic a known chemistry ingot with certifiable mechanical properties that can be remelted at foundries to make the complex geometrical forms that you all need to make, and goes right back into the world. The whole process starts all over again. And that, to me,
Sure.
I think you're nailing it. That is exactly what recycling is all about. And it is tough work. needs a lot of governmental support, and we need rules and regulations that make a lot of sense.
Sure.
There needs to be protections for employees and communities, et cetera. But sometimes they get a little, sometimes those things don't make a lot of sense, and we need to be smart enough to point out when those cases, exist.
Yeah, well, and a lot of times they're not in the industry. They don't see what it is, and they don't realize what the rule or the regulation, how it impacts us when we're out in the trenches. We're out there doing it and battling out to produce good castings, to provide stimulation for the economy, and to feed families and take care of families and all that sort of thing. I mean, it's not that we're a bunch of evil business people out here that are capitalists and we're just money hungry. Then that's not the case at all. And fortunately, there are companies like Federal that allow us to provide a good known chemistry for the metal that we need to be able to produce it efficiently.
Yeah, and going back on the regulatory side of things, that it's often that the folks in Washington aren't even thinking about foundries when they come up with some of these ideas. They're thinking there was just recently a heat standard that was proposed by OSHA, and it made it all the way through the rulemaking process and is currently been mothballed by the Trump administration. But it would probably have been enacted in its current form had the election gone a different direction. But that heat standard had nothing to do with foundries. It was written primarily to protect workers laying concrete and building roads in hot climates like Arizona and well, frankly, Texas. Well,
Right.
I understand completely why there has to be protections for those employees, and why heat exposure is such a big issue when you're literally out in the we're working in foundries that actually are hot for sure, but there's all kinds of things that we already do that are very
Absolutely.
common out of necessity. Nate, when I visited you at your last employer at D Foundry, I don't know if you remember this visit. It was in June of 2023, and I
I
swear
do.
in Houston that day it was 175 degrees.
Yeah.
Probably at
Very,
least
very
that.
humid, very hot. Yeah,
It's
and
unbelievable.
so as leaders of companies, and I was there at D Foundries for 12 years. I mean, we did lots of things to protect our teammates. We
Yep.
don't, last thing you want is one of your teammates, hitting the floor because they're got heat exhaustion. That's farthest thing from what we want to do.
No,
I
exactly.
mean, from the fact that we buy pallets of water, bottled water. You've got fans, you've got cooling vests that they can put on. There's all kinds of things that we do to mitigate that. And when it gets really hot and the humidity is really hot, I mean, to the point of being militaristic about it, get guys in a circle and everybody has to drink a bottle of water. I mean, and check on your teammates, watch their
Hmm.
backs, and when we're blocking and tackling for each other, that's the whole part of being a family. Because I'm with those guys in those facilities more than I am my own family, for Pete's
Yeah.
sake. So you
No, we
want to
feel
take
very
care of
much
them,
the
and
same way,
they are
Nate.
like
Yeah,
family.
totally.
Yeah. So
You just and look, there ought to be some guardrails as to what the minimums
absolutely,
are for sure. But it would have been nice when they were writing that had somebody come and talk to a foundryman and said, how are you addressing this challenge? How are you
yeah.
keeping the men
We've
and women in your foundry safe when it's hot? Great question.
yeah we've
We've got
already
a whole list
mitigated
of
some of that
answers here.
already.
Right.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah. So
is the assumption that you guys are not keeping people safe? It's interesting to me to listen to this conversation because the last guy we interviewed, Tim Carr from Cutting Edge Abrasives,
cutting edge approaches.
he was very much about safety, and talking about if he walked into a shop that wasn't practicing safe things, like I didn't have guards on their machinery and things, he wouldn't even sell to them. And
Right.
to hear you two guys talk, it's like that's just kind of core to our business, is core to our company, that we want to keep our employees safe and take care of them. But yet but
100%.
yet we have all this regulation happening. And I guess where's the disconnect here? Is it
Do you
is it
want
just
my
what you
opinion
said?
or do you want reality? Because my opinion, I believe in my heart that some of that is dictated by some of these people that are on some of these committees, and take it for whatever it's worth. But I mean, there are kickbacks that happen in the politics. I don't give a crap what anybody says. Those people are getting kickbacks, and there's somebody out there that is selling some product that they want to implement. And if they can create a rule or regulation that means they have to buy X, Y, and Z product, guess what? That means it drives sales for that company and whatever. And old Joe Schmo over here on the committee for the government is getting a kickback somewhere along the line, and there's many ways that they do it, and we're seeing that now. I mean, the kind of the pulling back of the curtain to see how they kind of do some of this stuff. That, to me, I think is what drives some of these silly regulations, is because somebody wants to sell a product, or maybe a product that they already have, but they want to sell more of it. So yeah, that's my opinion. A lot of the stuff that they're over-regulating, because we're already doing most of the stuff to keep our teammates and our companies safe. It doesn't behoove a small business to have people falling out and going and dropping out and having lost time accidents. That costs us way more money than anything else that we can do. So what do? We mitigate that risk, and we make sure that everybody's safe, almost to the point where sometimes we get a little silly with it ourselves because we don't want to have anybody fall out, or we don't want somebody injured. That's not what we're in the business to do.
No, it's 100% true, and I think that there's an old line that if you're not engaged in the process, if you're not at the table, then you're on the menu. You've maybe heard that phrase before. And
Sure.
so as it relates to the government affairs work that NIFS does as an example, we're spending a lot of the time that we spend, and Jared and his team are just fantastic at this and helping us break down as participants in the industry. They're helping us break down what are the regulations that affect us, how do we understand what the details are behind them, and then how do we offer our opinions back to these folks as to what makes sense. We do not have, at least I absolutely don't have, a intrinsic knee-jerk negative reaction to every idea that comes out of Washington. I just don't. I tend to look at it and be like, okay, some of this stuff I understand. I do a lot of traveling. I'm in a lot of places. I can see why certain things are necessary, but there's also all kinds of very specific feedback that we're able to offer. I think that makes a difference. And Nate, I will be at the fly-in in June. A lot of that I think is going to be focused on trade-related conversation. Because I don't see this particular administration spending a whole lot of time on the regulatory stuff.
No.
I think it's going to be much more focused on the macroeconomic discussions that are going on. But going
I'll see
back
you
to
there.
what's that?
I said, well, I'll see you there.
Okay. But look, these are, you've got to understand what's going on here, and I do think, Perry, that there is a I don't really know what the genesis of it is, but there's just a desire to continue to add layers to this stuff. Like there's always more that can be done, and I think to some degree that's true. There's new innovations that come out every day. If you're looking at respiratory health, for example, there's been a lot of work done on to protect workers in leaded environments from airborne lead. There should be. It's a known problem. And those of us that are in that world, have a very high level of responsibility for protecting our colleagues that deal with that head on, and we certainly take it very seriously. And thank God there's companies out there every day that are coming up with new ideas as to how to mitigate lead exposure in workforces or in workplaces like ours, because we're interested in every one of those new technologies for the most part.
So when it comes to lead and the nuances of that for us, I mean, even at D Foundries and at KN Manufacturing, we don't lead-based alloys. We're just not going to buy them. We're just not going to produce them, and we'll find some sort of an alternative. And typically, we can find something that works. What product lines or what industries do you see that just require the lead? I mean, maybe it's a bearing or a sleeve or bushing or something that needs the lubricity of the lead. I know it's better. It's free cutting. It's a cheaper alloy, so therefore it's less expensive for the product that they're producing. But intrinsically, it seems like to me that the U.S. government seems to be one of the largest consumers of lead-based alloys, which when they mandate that all these rules and regulations, the government does, but then they're the largest producer or consumer of these lead-based alloys. It just seems pretty crazy to me.
Well, I mean, you did sort of answer your own question. I mean, the incentive to um, to maintain lead as an alloying element in some of these things has to do, in certain cases, with cost. So if you take even example of the potable water systems that I talked about a minute ago, the part that touches the water cannot have lead in it, or the lead levels in it are very, very, very low. But perhaps a nut or a connector that is not going to ever make contact with water, there's no reason that has to be a more expensive alloy. It could just, you could make that alloy out of the traditional leaded plumbing brasses that have existed, for a century in this country. So there's an economic incentive there to maintain it. There is definitely, you use the word lubricity and machinability. Those are excellent reasons, and for certain applications, but particularly in the bearing spaces where those alloys will run anywhere from 8 on the low side to 22% on the high side of lead content, and that's the most efficient way to make that casting work. And so, it's they are still used, but you made a point too that you when you were at D, you made a concerted effort to steer every
Yes.
alloy away from having to, from that way you didn't have to comply with all the blood lead testings and everything else. And that's, there you go. You could afford to
Yeah.
do
Well,
that because your
it's safe.
customer base allowed it.
Yeah. Well, and it's safer for the team, the
Yep.
workforce, and I mean, most of the stuff that we're doing, a lot of the pump parts and things like that, let's say they're impellers or casings or whatever, most of the time it's not potable water. So therefore it's just moving waste products or some sort of a liquid stream, for a process. So really the lead doesn't really matter. It wouldn't hurt anything in that manner, but still there's other alloys that can be used. It seems like, and it's part of our job to educate our customers, because a lot of them, they just need to make a widget. They don't want to know the nuances of what it takes to make a casting, and what the metallurgy needs to be, or the mechanical properties and all that sort of stuff that goes along with it. They want a functional product that they don't have to worry about all that stuff. But guess what? That's what we're in the business to do, to be problem solvers, to educate them and train them so that
Right.
they can actually form some sort of a relationship with us as a small business. And other foundries that aren't doing that aren't taking the lead in doing that to educate their customers, they're doing their customers a disservice, and they're not forming a strong, as strong of a relationship as they can get. Because when you become an extension of your customers' engineering team or their staff, and they look to you as part of their company, and it's a relationship that is very, very hard to damage over a long period of time.
No, we certainly subscribe to that philosophy here. It really, the last thing that we want to be pinned down to is a price. Meaning, obviously, we provide prices all the time, but if that's all you care about us for, that's not the relationship that we look to have with our consumers and our customers. We really have to be provided. We have a lot of technical expertise here, and we
Yes.
try to inject that as much as we can and involve that in the casting making process. And we get calls all day, every day from our customers, Nate, that have a specific question about a nuance of this or that or the other thing, and oftentimes that we can save them a lot of time and energy, by helping them
Sure.
through that. But
Well, and as a small business, I mean, we don't always have the budget to have a degreed metallurgist on staff. So,
correct.
as a business owner and a foundryman, I rely on guys like you and the Federal Metal Company. So, I mean, it's a huge part of why we like to connect with companies that actually have that type of knowledge. I mean, it's a huge benefit. If I need to buy metal, I mean, I know that I've got, again, you guys are an extension of us. You guys have metallurgists on the staff, degreed metallurgists. Guess what? I may not have the answer, or may not have them on the staff that I can walk to their office to talk to them, but I can darn sure pick up the phone or send an email and get exactly what I need. So
No,
it's a win-win for all of us.
yeah, no, I absolutely agree with that. And I just want to make sure when you say you mean the Federal Metal Company. You don't mean Chris Greenfield specifically,
No,
because
no, not Chris. Yeah, I'm not getting metallurgical information and knowledge from Chris.
if I ever try to offer it to you, Nate, I need you to do me a favor and put a bag over my head and shut me up.
Oh, too good. You know what? Well, it takes a team to make it all work, and you're a vital part of your team,
Yeah.
and I guarantee to talk to the people that work around you and with you, they hold you in high regard.
No, look, it's actually, this is a terrific place to work, actually. You know, a lot of the principals from Terry Kelsey to Mike Byarski and folks like that. I mean, they're awesome people to work with every single day. It really is a lot of fun.
Yep, and I can only imagine how much fun it is because I know how much fun it is, and I say it all the time. You know, this foundry work is the best job I've ever had, and I can't imagine doing anything else. But you got to find the right people that do it because it's not for everybody.
No.
So you got to find that DNA strand in the individuals, and once they get it in there, they're in it for life.
You know, Mike Byarski was given an award last year. He was recognized by the American Foundry Society with and I'll butcher what it was called, but it was a lifetime achievement or commitment, sort of honor where, he's been so involved with AFS for so long that they recognized him at their casting congress last year in Milwaukee, and I was there, and as was Terry Kelsey, to hear Mike speak. And Mike was he went to the university at Drexel in Philadelphia, and he was in their co-op program, and he'd done a couple of things, and he got a co-op at Hale Pump in Conshohocken, Pennsylvania, which is a suburb of Philly. And the first day he walked in there and he saw that metal pour, he was hooked. And he's never
Amen.
not worked in the foundry industry since.
Amen to that. I'm telling
Yeah.
you. I went and watched it yesterday. They were like, I come back in the office after we were talking, and we kind of looked at the molding and all that sort of stuff, and they were like, "Is there anything else you want to see?" I was like, "Yeah, can we go back out and see the furnaces?" Man, there's nothing better than watching molten metal get melted down and poured. I just eat it up. And I own foundries, but it still is something about it. I just love it.
Well, I know you've got a lot of history in iron too, Nate. And I don't want to get talking about iron for two reasons. One, it's not our business, and B, I know literally nothing about it. But
Right.
but when I'm around, iron being poured, and I've had the good fortune of actually being at some of our largest steel mills in this country and watching those places, the scale, the scope, and the intensity of that process is just something to behold. It really is amazing. It is
Yeah,
very,
it's
very cool. But
incredible.
it's amazing at Federal too. I mean, when you see our furnaces being poured and you see, the volume of metal that's being poured out in spec at that rate, it's really, really awesome.
Yeah, it's incredible. I mean, and I will say that owning a foundry, owning Kansas Castings with my good partner Matt Lyons up there, it's there's something about this that's for me it's even more gratifying to melt and pour iron than it is to melt and pour copper-based alloys or even the steels and stainless steels that we buy, because we buy all certified ingot for our ferrous steels and stainless steels and super duplex and all that sort of stuff. But when you could take a pile of junk and it's sitting there and they blend it and melt it in the right proportions to hit the chemistries and hit the mechanical properties and pour these castings into something that's usable, because it's actually just junk sitting on the floor, rusty old junk. That is super gratifying, more so than taking the other ingots, because you're starting with something of a known chemistry intentionally, because we want to start with the very, very best because of the parts that we're actually producing. So it's very important in that manner, and I'm sure for you guys at Federal, it's the same way, because you're getting a bunch of junk and you're seeing all this stuff. Whereas we bring it in, it looks all nice and pretty. It's not as impressive when you're alloying it. You're not really alloying it up. Minute amounts for the trace stuff that burns off. But yeah,
Perry, I'm not going to let him get away with this for very long, because I listened to one of your earlier podcasts and I heard what he said about melting copper-based alloys, And
Yeah.
I wasn't going to get through this whole session without calling him out on that.
Good. Good.
he 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 said the quiet part out loud, which is that melting copper-based alloys is really difficult. And
It is difficult. It's
yeah,
extremely difficult. But
right.
guess what? That's why we buy certified ingot from
Yeah,
from Federal, because it is extremely difficult. It's not
right.
easy.
No.
But again, rule number one to making good castings: use good melt stock, use gilt
Yep.
melt material to begin with. So
Yep.
if you're struggling out there and you're pouring copper based alloys and you're not using certified material to begin with, well, stop doing that because that's dumb.
Yeah.
Buy it certified material and go from there. Quit alloying it up. There's a lot of people that will tell you, no, it's cheaper and all this other thing. Is it? Is it really cheaper because you're getting all this scrap and all this stuff that you're frustrated with, and you're producing inferior products to your end customers that they may be shopping somebody else? Start with good feedstock, and
Yeah.
you are going to be a much better foundry. You'll be a much better founderman, and it's the stuff that you don't have to deal with.
Well, so much of the cost of operating, whether it's an ingot maker like Federal Metal or a foundry, is taking as much of the material that you buy and turning it into a usable something. If you've got
Sure.
pour offs or bad castings or machinability problems at the end of the process, then you haven't saved yourself anything. What
No.
you've just done is you've actually added to your cost structure dramatically. And look, the one thing that we value here at Federal Metal more than anything from the economic side of the discussion is time. We really
Absolutely.
value how long does something take, and we put a real premium on our ability to produce good pounds quickly, and not we don't like sitting around and fixing things. That's why I mentioned earlier about we have to know what the chemistry and recovery and price is of everything that goes into that furnace, because that's the ultimately we want to take one taste of the cookie dough at the end of the batch and taste it and make sure it's right, and then we want to make cookies. That's what we're up to
Absolutely.
here.
Yep. Absolutely. Yep.
You mentioned
It's
something. You
incredible.
mentioned something there right at the very beginning, and I kind of wanted to circle back to that. You mentioned, and I hope I don't get this wrong, but I think you said over the last several years, I think you may have said decade, but I don't know if it's that long or not, a shift towards or a shifting in the momentum of what's going on in making things here in the country. And I wanted to ask about that because we've had this topic come up before of people, trying to find people that will actually come into the business, to come into the trades, to come into manufacturing specifically, and be willing to work. It sounds like every time I hear a story, it's, I work at the greatest place ever. I work with great people. I do a great job. I have, there's just nothing but goodness out of it, which is not something I ever heard in the high tech world that I came out of. So I think it's interesting. But can you elaborate a little bit more about what you were talking about earlier with this sort of shift in momentum into making things here in the States?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think there's a recognition, there appears to be a recognition, that we, for all kinds of reasons, national security probably being as big a one as any, that we have to be capable of making and building the things that we want to build here. You've perhaps seen a little bit, uh, some of the political, both rhetoric but also new policies coming out of Washington have to do with shipbuilding. I don't know if you've read anything about this, but there's been an office of shipbuilding, added to the office of the White House to
Hmm.
focus on increasing the capacity to build ships in the United States. Um, and I'm not just talking about military ships. I mean, that part is obvious. We have to be building our own military, but um, but I'm talking about even large container ships and things. That entire industry is really left this country. We are still disassemblers of ships in this country, but we are not builders of them. And there's a recognition now politically that that's a strategic weakness. And I certainly agree that it is. And that's just one example. And again, to so that we're not playing only one side of the political fence. If you go back to the policies that were passed in the last administration, at the beginning of the last administration, around building back America, and kind of improving the potable water drinking systems. There was $80 billion of public money allocated to that effort. Our electrical grids need a massive amount of work. We're hearing all kinds of things now about the problems with our air traffic control systems. Infrastructure in general is been lagging. Investment in infrastructure in America is probably 25 years too late. In order to make those investments, we have to be making things. We need our young people to not just decide they're going to go off to college and take on mountains of debt, to recognize that there are opportunities for them with good technical training, whether it be in a trade like electrical work or welding or plumbing, or just in basic material handling skills. I think I mentioned really early in this talk, Perry, I was from upstate New York, and one of my jobs I had in high school and college, I worked in a stone quarry, and 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 um, and it was north of Buffalo. And to get from the scale out at the road back to the pit and get loaded, if you were a large semi, right, that was, let's say, rebuilding a road and you wanted to buy crushed limestone, it was a mile and a half to drive all the way down and get loaded up, right? And then drive all the way back so that you could scale out and go to the road and dump your load and then come back. And that's all you were doing every day, was just loading out. And we had a guy in there that drove a Caterpillar front end loader. Okay. And one of the reasons that the quarry that I worked for was successful was because of this guy. He was so good at getting the weight, and I don't remember what the weight is. Let's say it was 40,000 pounds of stone he would put in the back of that truck. He could get it so close to the optimum weight without getting the guy over scale. Because the last thing he wanted to do was get up to the scale, realize he was overweight, come all the way back down, have to dump off metal or dump off stone, and then drive all the way back. That's a disaster. This guy was perfect. He nailed it every single time. And I was working there in a maintenance capacity, and I could see him. I was up on top of one of these towers working, and I would watch that guy drive that piece of equipment. And it blew my mind how perfect he was at that. My point is you don't necessarily have to have, a technical skill like being able to weld underwater. That's awesome if you can do it, right? To work on an oil rig or something. Sometimes just being insanely proficient at moving big, heavy pieces of equipment around is worth its weight in gold and is a very fulfilling job. The jobs that exist in our industry are high-paying jobs. And if they're not, they're going to be, because otherwise you won't be able to compete for employees. They have good benefits. And at the end of the day, I think there's an intrinsic value in going home knowing you just accomplished something, as opposed to delivering DoorDash. And I don't mean to take shots at DoorDash, but that service level, economy, to me, doesn't make a lot of sense for most young people. It's all it is to me is other companies externalizing their risk and their costs onto individuals, whether it be insurance or whatever, depreciation on assets exists. Why do that when you can, contribute to a company like ours or like any of a myriad other foundries that exist in this country? To me, it doesn't make any sense. So I'm pretty passionate about what this next 10 to 20 years looks like. And because I see nothing but inertia to reinvesting in American manufacturing. And again, I'm not even really speaking to that from a political standpoint. I'm simply saying it's a necessity. And for basically since, the 1950s, we've convinced every young person that they weren't successful unless they went to college. And I think we now know that that was probably always a lie, but certainly given the cost structure of that investment nowadays, it doesn't make any economic sense.
So I've heard this.
And back then, it wasn't as expensive either as it is today.
Right.
So now the economic imperative today is that it literally the economic return doesn't exist.
Right.
It just doesn't. And there's all kinds of real. Frankly, I just celebrated my daughter's college graduation over the weekend. And so
Right.
it's not that I don't believe it. I'm a huge believer in education. I just I think that it just depends on what you want to do with it. You know,
Yeah.
It's
um,
not for everybody.
it certainly isn't for everybody. And I think, culturally, and I don't mean to get on a soapbox here. I had a wonderful experience after I graduated from high school. I was a Rotary exchange student in Finland, and I lived about an hour and a half outside of Helsinki. I was 18. I turned 19 while I was there, and I'd actually already graduated from high school here in the States. But I deferred my enrollment to college for a year, and I was enrolled in the high school level there. Well, one of the things that they were doing then, and I don't know what their education system looks like today, but one of the things that culturally that existed there was they had kids that at the age of like 13 or 14 were routed into quote the traditional college route, and then there were kids that were routed into business trade sorts of things like accountancy and financial management, that sort of thing, and
Right.
pushed in that direction. And then there were kids that were pushed into trades. But critically, there was not one option wasn't necessarily better than the other. There wasn't this, there wasn't a push. There weren't kids that had children bound for the trades that were clamoring to make sure those kids took the university track, because there was a recognition that there was value in each of those three tracks, and that the value was more or less equal depending on the skill set of the child. And that had a profound impact on me. And as I came back here and went to school, and I've always thought that we did a terrible job of 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 valuing young people's ability to fix vehicles, or do any of the things that are so important to our day-to-day lives.
Yeah.
And because we had this high-minded idea that they'd be better off as a social major.
Yeah. Yeah, and I could look back at even growing up, the college educated people. I could see it. They never really necessarily said it, but you could see the way that they treated the plumber and things of that nature. And they would kind of look down their nose at them until they needed their sewer unclogged, and they had to have somebody come and do it because they weren't going
Yeah.
to get their hands dirty to do it themselves. Although there's a lot of good life lessons to be learned in doing that yourself, and at least attempting it, to realize, oh, that's not as easy as what I thought it was. I'm going to call my buddy Justin Tucker to have him come unclog this sewer, or run a new sewer line, or whatever the case might be, a septic system. So yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah. No, I get pretty wound up. I really, I have an awful lot of respect for the men and women that work here at Federal Metal doing the hard work that makes what we do possible.
Yep. Yeah.
For sure.
Even though, I mean, when you stop and think about it, a lot of it is hard work. It's hot, it's cold, it's tough. You lose a finger from smashing your finger, and silly stuff like that. But when it's all said and done, I mean, a lot of those individuals, like the guy that you were talking about in the front end loader, or the excavator, they make it look so easy because they figured out the easiest way to do it. So therefore, it's not as difficult as what it would be for myself or Perry to go do those jobs. Day one, because the learning curve is so steep. They've already figured it out, which is pretty cool. I mean, I give my wife kudos, because when she's doing a task, she can whittle out all of the garbage and the crap. I'll do something the same way or not the same way she's doing the same job, and she does it way faster than I am. I'm like, holy crap. And then you start paying attention. Okay, she just figures, she has a mind of figuring out how to get it done the most efficient way possible. So it's pretty cool how the American workers, and not just American workers, it could be people workers all over the world, they figure out the fastest way to get things done, which is pretty amazing.
Yeah, it's called letting the work show you how to do it. And Nate, I also just want to give you props. Excellent wife reference there. Way to give credit. I see what you did there. It's not lost on me.
Yeah. Yeah, well, my wife is smoking hot, so I mean, I give her all the kudos.
There you
My
go.
wife can do everything that
Harry,
I
he's
do
making us
way
look like
better.
he's making us look like chumps here.
Well, if the
There's
shoe
nothing
fits,
we can do
you
to.
just
There's
lace that
absolutely
rascal
nothing we
right
can
up.
do to. He's just dunking on us.
It didn't make us look like chump, but I've got, as I said the other day, I think I'm at would have been 40. I will be 43 years of marriage this year. So
Congratulations.
he hasn't got that
Congratulations.
on me.
No, he does
No,
not.
I
He
got
doesn't.
30 years.
He doesn't have 30 on me. I've got my wife and I have been married 30 years.
30 years.
Yeah,
So he's got a
ours
long
was
way to
30,
go
30
still.
this
it's
February.
about 4 years. 4 of the best years of Kari's life.
Yeah,
So-
I understand that.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if my wife has got a whole year accumulated yet of good times.
Yeah.
You said something earlier, just in that last little bit, that reminded me of something. When I was young, one of my jobs was to do construction work, and at the time, you're just out there pounding nails in the summer in the sun. But one of the things that I always appreciated about that job is you could turn around at the end of the day, and you could look and you could say, I put that up today. I built that today. And, that's one aspect of this kind of work that I never had, or I very rarely had in high tech. High tech was a lot of work a lot of times, and it would maybe be at the end of the month, at the end of 6 weeks, you could turn around and say, look, I made that. But there was this everyday sort of sense of accomplishment that I had making things, just building things. So I wanted to ask you, and I put you on the spot a little bit, because I've heard this a couple times as well. And it also kind of speaks to the narrative that we have told young people for years. This idea of pay, and the narrative has been you got to go to college to make good money. But yet, what I'm hearing more and more in the manufacturing world is you can have a good job with good pay in the manufacturing world as well. And I'm curious, that sounds great, but what kind of numbers are we talking about? I mean, maybe that's an unfair question because it's such a broad spectrum of kinds of work you're doing. But if a guy were to, if I'm 18 years old and I'm looking at, okay, do I go to college and I acquire whatever it is, $200,000 worth of debt and get into a job that's going to pay me probably in the neighborhood of, at some point, they're going to be making, $150,000 a year, somewhere in that neighborhood. Or I can go this other route and not accumulate all that debt, but I'm going to make how much?
That's a great question. And I'll just tell you that this is like metallurgy, Perry. Our CFO and his team, which includes our HR department, would be like, Chris, what the hell do you know about our pay rates? To which I would say, yeah, very little. They do a great job of making sure I know virtually nothing. But to provide actually a little bit more structure to it, it really just depends on where you're at. Now, first of all, there are all kinds of jobs that exist in manufacturing. First of all, there are tons of foundry owners and folks that own scrap facilities, et cetera, that own the places that don't have college degrees, and so the sky's
Right.
the limit on what you can earn. In fact, I'll just share. The Case Western Reserve University's Material Sciences Department visits Federal every few years, and the students come in and they've never seen a place like this before. They're very scientific-y, right? And they're incredibly bright students. My goodness, they never would have been friends with me growing up. They way too smart for that. But they come in. But part of my talk to them is I'm like, look, there's a massive transition going on in this country that will allow you to buy businesses. You could own businesses by the time you're 35, or you can work for a biomedical engineering company designing knees. But I'm telling you, if you want to actually make the knee itself, you could probably own the company that does it very quickly, because there's this is what Nate is already on to right now with his business plan and what he's trying to accomplish. There's opportunities out there because of this generational
Right.
transfer of assets that's got to take place. But getting back to your actual question, we have to, if you want to start looking at the the entry level jobs here, Perry, to where somebody walks in the door. Our team here spends a lot of time looking at the marketplace, and we recognize that we're not, in this sort of world, you're just not going to be able to set a wage that is, even average with the overall workforce. You have to post a number out there that provides a premium to the hourly work rate for similar types of jobs in other industries in order to attract them. And we're in Cleveland, Ohio, as I've mentioned. It's a relatively industrial city still, but there are new jobs coming in. Amazon has built warehouses all over the place, just like they have all over the country, and they're hoovering up employees left, right, and center. You can see them. But I would say, people coming in and and starting on the ground floor are going to make well more than the average entry worker in the marketplace. And then the opportunities for growth are pretty significant, and there really are no barriers to it. Unless you're going to be, again, our CFO or a metallurgist, right, or somebody
Right.
in
Right.
technology here. That's different. You need to have defined and degreed skills and to succeed. But pretty much you can go anywhere in our space without a college degree, and there's there are very little limits on what you can do financially.
I think that's a key thing, is this idea of opportunity, which
Mhm.
may not exist in other places. The idea that I could learn, and I could do my own business. And as you say, the sky becomes the limit, right, as to what you can make and earn, and the number of families you can affect. And that seems to be a recurring theme too, as well as taking care of other people, right?
Right.
Having the
100%.
ability to be able to do that. And I think that's a story that seems to get missed quite a bit, about this idea of getting into manufacturing, of the opportunity, the potential opportunity. It may not be your opening dollars per hour, but start thinking about, where do you want to be in life? And I think a lot of people don't understand that, as Nate mentioned, this guy coming out to unclog his toilet or his sewer line. That guy's probably knocking down a pretty good salary owning his own business, especially if he's busy, right? And we don't think about that. I mean, because I'm one of those guys that came from the other side, right? I spent my entire career as a software developer, and there were opportunities for people who were ambitious and who could apply themselves and really did the work, but the idea of starting your own software company, there's very, very, very few people that do that and succeed. Whereas starting my own plumbing company, starting my own whatever, scrap recycling place, I mean, you can probably pull that off and do very, very well. So, I mean, and that's all. I think that's the other story.
There's a reason why BlackRock has created an investment arm, and all they're doing is buying regional plumbing contractors and electricians and rolling them up. There's a reason they're doing it. The reason they're doing it is there's money in it. And
Yeah.
there's also, as again, I referenced it, this generational transfer that needs to take place to buy out the folks that are in their 60s or 70s. It's, might be the second or third generation in the company, but now the kids don't want to do it, or the grandkids don't want to have any interest in it. So now somebody's got to come and do it. And it blows my mind that, folks on Wall Street have picked up on this and they're like, I want to control this industry.
Hmm.
So if you think it's expensive now, Perry, wait until they start getting controls over, localized monopolies in that space, and then the cost of all this work is only going to be higher.
And I've said it a lot. I mean, you talk to young kids and in the high school and that sort of thing, and they may not know what they want to do when they grow up. Matter of fact, I don't even know what I want to do when I grow up. But that's beside the point. When it's all said and done, life just kind of tends to happen, And if they'll look and they'll find somebody, like somebody will see this podcast and they'll reach out to Chris or reach out to Perry or myself and looking for some guidance and some coaching and some mentoring. You know what? The last third of my life is I'm going to dedicate it to being a coach and a mentor to people that want to listen, that want to grow, and they want to do better for themselves and for their families, because they don't have to stay in that rut of work, getting up and, oh crap, I got to go work for Joe Schmo over here. I hate going to that place. I don't want to do that. But wake up when your feet hit the floor. You're like, man, guess I get to go do this. I get to go to work. Not that I have to go to work. You find something that you're passionate about, that you really like, and some of that passion doesn't actually start when you very first start. Because when you get there, you don't know, come here from Sikkim, you don't know what the heck to do. So therefore, it comes when you gain that experience, and that experience doesn't come with a $150,000 paycheck for year one. It just doesn't happen. So guess what? Do your time, listen, show up every day, and 85% of the job is to just show up. If you'll show up, and the other 15% is you'll be coachable and you'll listen to instruction and follow this direction and do everything that needs to be done and try to improve every day, you can run that company, whatever that company might be. You might be able to buy it from the current owner when it's all said and done, but you got to put the time in and you got to show up. If you don't show up, you're the worst employee that company has.
Oh, absolutely. No, that's for sure. And this goes back into, I've always been Mike Rowe is I don't know if you guys are familiar with Mike Rowe. He's been talking about this stuff for years. And my wife, who's retired now, but she was in publishing, actually did a book with him, and spent some time with him on speaking tours and so forth. And his messaging going back over the last 20 years on this topic is, I think, largely, it only has been listened to by a small percentage of the population, but he's been nailing this for decades. And part of the secret here is kids keep being told to follow their passions. Well, I don't know what the hell that means. What do you mean? I mean, most kids,
18-year-old knows what their passion is. They have no idea.
Some do, and they're incredible dancers or violinists or artists or engineers. They're super smart at that area. I certainly did not have passions that were worth following when I was 18 years old. I mean, if I had done that, I'd be a downhill ski racer still, and I'm 56.
You have Olympic gold medals.
Maybe, but no, I certainly was. I wasn't doing any of that stuff. I just, I guess I was knocking rocks together in a stone quarry. I'm like, this is kind of fun, But again, I showed up.
Yeah. No, that's what you got to do. I mean, I can remember being 14, 15 years old, hauling shingles up a roof for my uncle and doing all the grunt work and picking up all the trash and crap on the ground. Was that glamorous? Was that my passion? Hell no. But it's part of who I am today, and I remember what that was like. The silly mistakes that you make when you're out in the foundry and you're rolling a casting over, to inspect it in the table blast, and you smash your finger between something else. All those little things that happen, guess what? It makes you a better human, and you grow and you get better and you get better and you get better. The part of the problem that I see with most people is they're not critical. They don't take an observation or listen to constructive criticism. They just get defensive and they say, no, that's not me, and they don't own it. Fortunately, over the last 12 years of working at D Foundries, fortunately and unfortunately, my commute was about 2 to 2.5 hours every day, back and forth. And so I got a lot of windshield time and a lot of time to think and meditate. And by the time I would get home, I had already analyzed everything that I did really well that day, what I sucked at, and what I was never going to do again, because it just didn't work. That was dumb, and we don't do dumb more than one day. So that was a huge blessing for me, and I wouldn't be where I'm at today if it wasn't for those opportunities that I had at D Foundries. So it's a big deal. So it just kind of happens. Life just kind of happens, and the next thing you know, here you are.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So, is there anything that the Federal Metal Company does to retain employees or things of that nature, just to try to some nuances that maybe some things that you guys do that maybe other people don't do, or some ideas?
Well, I mean, part of it is culture. Creating a culture that is open and transparent and not burdened by layers and layers of hierarchy that is oppressive to the people that aren't at the top of it. That's a big thing. And I think, generally speaking, and the feedback we get from our employees, and many times we've been recognized in Northeast Ohio as one of Northeast Ohio's best places to work. And that's a validation of that. And these are independent surveys done to the employees. So, I mean, that part is, I think, real important to maintaining, loyalty in the firm. And we have a lot of folks here that have been here a long time.
Right.
And, but, having obviously competitive wages, competitive benefits, and retirement plans, these are all the table stakes to keeping people around. But I think what really keeps people around are the relationships they have with the folks that are around them. So the more that you create opportunities for that interaction throughout the company, from ownership all the way to the frontline, worker, that's really important. When folks are isolated, when they don't have access to getting questions answered, or they don't feel that they would be listened to even if they did ask a question, or that's what isolates people and sends them moving in other directions. And we do all we can here to break down those barriers. And I think that's an important part of how we maintain a great workforce. And we have a dynamite team here. And we celebrate them all the time. I invite both of you. I think, Nate, you already do. But Perry, check us out on social media. This is something we've invested in for 5 or 6 years, and every Monday we're featuring somebody else in the company at some level. And people love that stuff. And if you were to come to Federal Metal, you'd see that our walls are not adorned with history; they're adorned with the people. They're our rock stars. They're our roster, and it's more than just buzzwords and talk around here. It's actually how we all live. And our ownership is recently invested in brand new locker room facilities, which are fantastic. I mean, they're not probably going to compete with the Cleveland Browns in terms of locker room facilities, but it's not bad. I mean, it's really nice and big and clean and airy. And we have a new break room being commissioned as we speak. A massive.
I was say you could probably win as often as the Cleveland Browns, though.
Oh
yeah, that's such. Sure. Thankfully, Perry, I'm not a native Clevelander, and I love Cleveland, and I'm passionate about sports, and I watch my dear friends and neighbors suffer, and it's so tough. I mean, it just is so tough, and I would love nothing more than the Browns to be good, and they're just not. They're just not. Thankfully, I've got the Buffalo Bills in my back pocket.
Sports. Yeah, professional sports. I am completely agnostic. I guess I'm an antagonizer more than anything. So whoever somebody's playing and that somebody you're rooting for the Bills, I'm going to root for the other team just because it's fun to have a little bit of debate and rhetoric when it's all said and done. A little extra needly because I don't have a dog in the hunt for that.
Well, you're an Oklahoman, right? So you guys, you just have to decide whether you're a Sooner or a Cowboy, and everything else goes from there.
Yeah, and it's Boomer Sooner, by the way. So
okay, there you go.
Yeah, I don't root for anybody in Stillwater. It's actually called Stillwater.
I know.
One of my old business partners in the internet business, David Hawkins, he's an investment guy. He's a graduate from OSU, so we have a lot of banter back and forth. Matter of fact, I just talked to him this week. It was good to catch up with him. But yeah, it all of those sort of things so all the things that you do on social media, on LinkedIn, and that sort of thing, and you guys are promoting and elevating the team, which is really admirable, and it's something that I see that is really important, and we're working on updating our website and getting our website for Kansas Cats, is having those bios for those employees. There's other people that we've talked to. Who's Your Pattern, for example? They have their bio, they have videos of their employees stuff, because they're the ones that are actually the ones doing the work. It isn't the Chris, it isn't the president and CEO, it's not the Nate of the facility. Those guys are the hands and the feet of the company. If the company doesn't exist without those employees, it's so important to make sure that they get the recognition that they deserve, because without them, there is no Federal Metal Company.
Oh, that's 100% true. And every single customer, when I go visit customers and I visit, foundries out there all over the place. The great ones all have that in common, Nate. They all
Yep.
they all have employees that are fully engaged in the process.
Yeah. So, quick question. So, what is one of the things that you guys do for your employees that your employees rave about, and they love it when it comes back around, whether it's a crawfish boil or it's a steak dinner that you guys are doing when they hit a certain target or something? What are some things that you guys have done that's successful in that manner?
It's interesting. Events like that you'd think would be a bigger deal. They're actually not as big a deal. I mean, we do a lot of it's economic. What are the things that when they're working together to achieve a goal that has a compensatory element to it at the end for achieving it? This is I think the most meaningful thing and the most sustainable. Events come and go, Nate. You can do, and we've done all the picnics and everything else. We can do all that, and we do those things from time to time, and usually they're attended usually by the same percentage of the people that work for you. There's other folks that when they're not here, they enjoy being with their families, right? And they're not looking for another reason to get back to work or to get back to right. So I would say it's goal oriented.
Okay.
Yeah.
So a goal that the whole team gets to pull in the right direction. You're all playing tug of war, and you guys are trying to achieve whatever that achievement might be. That seems to move the needle for the team at Federal Metal.
Yeah, I think the other thing that's real important here, and Peter Nagusky has been doing this for as long as he's been the president and CEO of the company, and Peter owns Federal Metal. He's the fourth generation member of the Nagusky family that owns Federal Metal. Peter and Mike Byarski meet with all of the employees at least quarterly, and sometimes more often than that, depending on what's going on. These are very useful, impactful conversations, and they are often our conversations. Peter is a very easy person to talk to. He's very approachable and genuinely interested in what he hears from the folks. And honestly, I think that means a ton to people. I really do.
Yeah. Being accessible and walking. I mean, even when obviously he's a really busy guy with everything that's going on, but knowing that those individuals can talk to you and hey, if they need to, they can knock on your door and get a closed door meeting with you and
yep.
it may just be something that they're struggling with at home or family or whatever, because technically we're all family when we're working with one another, and that's the way it should be. Open door policy all the time. You got my cell phone number. You can call me anytime you want, that sort of thing. So that's very helpful. But Chris, we really appreciate you coming on the podcast. I've learned a lot. I know that you guys have a lot of different products and things of that nature that a lot of foundries can utilize and do utilize, from art foundries to the plumbing guys to the memorial guys and everything in between for industrial castings. I can't speak highly enough about Federal Metal and how they've taken care of me as a general manager at D Foundries and at KN, quick quotes and things of that nature. So I really thank you guys for coming on the podcast. Maybe we can get Peter on at some point just to talk about, leadership and things like that. Maybe we'll see.
Oh no, he's incredibly way too self-deprecating on these things because he's an incredible leader and has a ton to offer on this topic. He really does. So I'm honored that you guys asked Federal to come, and I'm honored to represent our firm here. I give you to a lot of credit for starting this up, from scratch and looking for an audience out there. We all play a critical role in the future of America together, and I'm honored to be included here on the roster of folks you have coming to talk. So good luck to both of you.
We'll have you on again at some point in time, I'm sure.
Okay.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Chris. It's been great.
All right, Perry, you too.
Take care. See you soon.